got to give a shout out to DSNY Newscast, because they did a video recently where they talked about, Mickey Mouse possibly being lost to public domain. Now, they did mention that the only Mickey Mouse that would be heading in that direction on January 1st of next year would be the early 1920 ones from, Steamboat Willie, Plain Crazy, and so on. But what they did mention in the video is that it seems that Disney has found a way to, I guess you could say, elude, the public domain for the early works of Mickey in a unique way. You see, obviously knowing that this time was going to be, just around the corner, this moment was, historically was just around the corner, they basically made, and, came up, I should say, not made, but came up with an idea to utilize a part of the Steamboat Willie short with Mickey behind the steering wheel of the boat as part of the introductory image when it comes to the animated projects, whether it's movies, shows, or shorts. And by doing so, they basically now have ownership of that. That's basically copyrighted under them. So by kind of making that unique little, I guess you could say, change in arrangement, it has kind of put Steamboat Willie in a situation to where, yeah, it is going to go to public domain, but if anybody tries to use the Steamboat Willie image of Mickey from that, it's not going to work out very well for them. We'll put it that way. It's not going to work out very well for them. So, yeah, the only Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse shorts from back then in the late 20s that people have to look at as possibilities to, I guess make profit off of in public domain is from, like I said, from shorts like Plain Crazy and so on. But, again, DSNY Newscast did bring up something a little interesting as well. You see, even though they know that the non-late 1920s versions of Mickey and Minnie are entering public domain and could be utilized for profit, they did acknowledge that another character that was a Disney original before Mickey, that being Oswald, who Disney ended up getting back in the past decade or so, Oswald entered public domain this year. But what's interesting is what they pointed out. You see, DSNY Newscast pointed out the fact that last month, in December of 2022, we saw the debut online, and I'm pretty sure before this theatrically, of an all-new Oswald the Lucky Rabbit short. Basically drawn in the same style as the original 1920s. But why did Disney do this? Why did they do this basically in the last few months before Oswald entered public domain? Very simple. To make it harder for anybody to want to use Oswald in any shape or form. Yeah, they did this basically to make sure nobody would use Oswald or his girlfriend Odessa in any shape or form. That is a fact. That is a fact. Now, people might say, well, that's kind of petty on their part because they know what they should have just known what was going to happen and allow it to happen. That's true. But I think ever since the early works of Winnie the Pooh went into public domain, let's just say that, in my opinion, woke them up. It woke them up and made them realize, oh crap, the same thing that's happened with Winnie the Pooh, with the upcoming Blood and Honey movie that will get a theatrical run next month because everybody's talking about it and I'm surprised this is even happening. And I'm probably intrigued to see what it's about. To avoid a similar situation happening with Oswald and then eventually Mickey Mouse, Disney basically said, look, we gotta fix this. We gotta make sure that even though Oswald does enter public domain, that we still have a hold of him. We still have, control over the character, over the IP. So thus, we ended up getting this new short. But not only that, but people will point out that Disney, DSNY Newscast pointed this out, and other people pointed it out, I should say, that Disney also debuted a new commercial advertisement if you will, for France using Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. They also acknowledge that recently Disney has brought Oswald and his girlfriend Odessita, easy for me to say, into the parks to meet and greet with. So essentially, what DSNY Newscast and others have basically said and pointed out to me and anybody else that's paying attention to this is that Disney is covering all their bases. Yeah, Disney is covering each and every one of their bases to make sure that what's going on, or what has happened with Winnie the Pooh, even though it's based on the early works, doesn't happen, like I said, to their properties. Now, they did point out that other Disney characters will enter public domain in the next several years, basically around 27 and 28, that being Donald Duck, and that being Goofy. And I guarantee you that finding a way to get around, Mickey, going into public domain, the early works of Mickey Mouse going into public domain, Mickey and Minnie, that is, going into the public domain next year, as well as Oswald and his girlfriend Odessita going into public domain this year. I guarantee you Disney's going to be coming up with some ideas throughout the next several years to use the classic styles of Donald and Goofy to make sure none of them enter public domain. And let's not also forget this too. Clarabelle Cow and Horse Color will also enter public domain within the next couple of years, if not probably next year as well. And if that's the case, then knowing Disney, they still value those characters like they've been doing recently, giving them another shot in the arm, then basically I guarantee we'll be seeing more classic designs of Clarabelle and Horse Color show up in the next few years or in the next several months as well, to avoid that situation, or at least find a way around it to where, the characters will be put into public domain, but it won't be so easy to use them like a lot of people are thinking it will be. And that's pretty much a fact. Now, he also brought up the fact that Disney's not the only major studio having to probably, work against this, or at least find a way around this. He brought up that Warner Brothers and a lot of their properties, Warner Brothers Discovery that is, and a lot of their properties will also face public domain possibilities within the next decade. That being Batman, that being Superman, and then of course the Looney Tunes like Porky, Bugs, and Daffy and Elmer. Now, will Warner Brothers do what they can? Will Warner Brothers Discovery do what they can to keep a lot of those properties under the belt? Probably. Especially if, like the DC stuff, if they're planning for the next 10 years, as they're saying, as James Gunn and all of them are saying, becomes a success profitably, then there's no doubt they're going to do what they can to retain the works, the early works, I should say, or basically all works, let's put it that way, Batman and Superman, and even Wonder Woman when the time comes up for them to go into public domain. The same with the Looney Tunes. If they decide to come up with some new ideas for the Looney Tunes, by, finding a way to utilize their classic designs, then you can bet your boot, as Santa would say in Frosty the Snowman, that they're going to find a way to do so. They will find a way to utilize the classic designs to make sure it gets harder, or is hard, I should say, for anybody to use those characters, use the design of those characters in any shape or form once they hit the public domain. So a lot of studios, starting with Disney right now, are definitely finding ways, or at least coming up with ways, to get around the whole public domain deal. And the thing is, you can't blame them. You can't blame them because, again, Disney, knowing what potentially could have happened with Oswald and Odessita, and potentially what could happen with Mickey and Minnie, Disney's like, like I said, they saw what happened with Winnie the Pooh, even though it's based on the early works that are public domain. They saw what happened there and said, screw this, we are going to make sure that doesn't happen again. And off to the races they went with the new Oswald short and the incorporation of the Steamboat Willie image before and after all their animated projects to make sure it gets a lot harder down the line. It gets a lot harder down the line. Now, does that mean, though, like I said, the plain crazy designs of Mickey and Minnie are safe? No, it doesn't. It doesn't mean they're safe. What it means is if Disney doesn't find a way to utilize those, which I'm pretty sure they'll find a way to do so, those two could end up in a situation similar to Winnie the Pooh. In other words, people will be able to utilize those designs and not the ones that, Disney's finding a way to kind of prevent from happening as we get closer to the date of public domainship, for the characters. But yeah, they're doing what they can. They're finding loopholes. And again, like I said, you can't blame them or anybody else, especially seeing what's going on with Winnie the Pooh. Which is why I think the Blood and Honey movie is getting so much attention, because of the fact that now people are curious, what other, characters that will enter public domain could follow suit. And by getting that kind of attention with that kind of a question, these studios are like, oh, heck no, that ain't going to happen. Let's find a way around it. Let's either try to retain these characters, all the way through, or let's try to find a way to avoid, them being used in public domain, even after they go into it, like they've done with Oswald, and obviously what they plan to do with Mickey. But yeah, the video overall was very informative. It really was. And, they did bring up the fact that Disney, their classic animated library and even live action movie library is, somewhat based off of, public domain. All the early works, from the classic fairy tales, from Frozen, Snow White, Alice in Wonderland, Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, what else? I got to think. What else? Aladdin, I think. Yeah, Aladdin, Little Mermaid, Sleeping Beauty, Pinocchio, Cinderella, you name it. Hercules, Tarzan. All these are stories that are in the public domain. These are stories that are in the public domain that basically anybody could look at and utilize any way they want. I mean, why do you think we got not one but 3 Pinocchio films last year? And the last one being, the darkest, if you will. It's because the story's in public domain. Disney can't argue and say, oh, you're using our character. No, they're not using the design of the character. They're using a different design. So, yeah, it's really... So it's really an interesting time frame, if you will, an interesting scenario. But yeah, they basically said, Disney has had a history of doing this themselves. But the catch that I don't think they brought up, as I mentioned, is Disney's is creating their own unique designs for the characters, and not the designs that people know of. I mean, I mentioned Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. They brought that up, saying that within the the 2030s, I believe, that's when Snow White, well, not the 2030s, but basically the 2040s, yeah. I think around 2046 is when Snow White, or 2045, one of them, is when Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs will enter public domain. So in other words, let's say YouTube is still around by then, which it should be, and hopefully maybe in the eyes of a lot of folks is kind of a hybrid of what it was when it started and so on. Basically evolved to a point that, isn't as, confusing as it is now with its algorithms and all that. But basically a lot of people won't have to worry about Disney copyrighting them with showing, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs on YouTube for free, because it would be public domain. But again, this is one of those situations where Disney's probably going to try to, work a way around that and make sure they retain some of that version of Snow White as the years go on, even if it goes in the public domain. But yeah, it's an interesting time. It is an interesting time for Disney, for studios like Disney and even Warner Brothers and such, because again, I think with what happened with Winnie the Pooh and Blood and Honey and everything, I think that woke everybody up. I really do. I think it woke everybody up with the attention it got. It made them realize, hey, we cannot let what happened with Winnie the Pooh, even though it's the early works, to happen to Mickey, Minnie, Oswald, Odessita, or anybody else. We got to make sure to find a way to keep that and prevent that from happening. And I think that's what we're getting. I think basically that's what we're getting right now. I think studios, as I mentioned, are opening their eyes and realizing, yeah, we better do something before it's too late. But what do you guys think? What do you guys think about the whole situation with Mickey Mouse going into public domain in 2024, possibly? Do you think Disney will do what they can to not only keep a hold of that, just like they did with Oswald? Do you think maybe they'll try to retain that, so they don't have to worry about public domain for the next 95 years again or whatever? What are your thoughts? Comment below, live chat during premiere, like the video. You will get a podcast version of this on my BW Roses Discussions podcast and all your favorite audio podcast locations except for Pandora. But guys, give me your thoughts, and until next time, I am out.